The first $100,000 is the hardest money you will ever make. Not the second $100,000, not the first million, just the first $100,000. In fact, legendary investor Charlie Munger once said that the first $100,000 is a brutal milestone, but once you cross it, wealth begins to grow faster than most people expect. And the reason isn't luck. It isn't secret stock picks, and it isn't some complicated financial strategy. The reason is something much simpler: momentum. Because when it comes to building wealth, the hardest part isn't growing money, it's starting the engine. Today we're going to break down exactly why the first $100,000 is so difficult to reach, why it changes everything once you hit it, and how ordinary people actually get there faster than they think. The early stage is always the slowest. When people first start investing, progress feels painfully slow. You might invest a few $100s, maybe a few thousand, and after months of saving and investing, the results barely feel noticeable. Your account grows, but not by much. And that's because in the beginning, almost all of the money in your portfolio comes from you, not from your investments. For example, imagine someone who invests $500 per month. After 1 year, they've invested $6,000. If the market grows 8%, their investment might grow by about $480. Notice something important. The growth from the market is still tiny compared to the money they contributed. At this stage, your wealth grows mostly because of your income and discipline, not because of compounding. That's why the early stage feels slow. The real power of compounding. But something interesting begins to happen as your investment balance grows. Eventually, your money begins to work harder than you do. Let's say you've built your portfolio to $100,000. Now, if your investments grow by 8% in a year, that's $8,000 in growth. And suddenly, the numbers start to feel different. Your money is now growing by thousands of dollars per year. And if your portfolio continues growing, those numbers keep getting larger. At $200,000, an 8% return becomes $16,000. At $500,000, that same return becomes $40,000. And at $1 million, an 8% return equals $80,000 per year. This is when wealth building starts to feel completely different, because your investments begin generating serious growth on their own. Why most people never reach their first $100,000. Here's the unfortunate reality. Most people never reach their first $100,000, not because they can't, but because they stop too early. The early stage of the investing journey requires something that many people struggle with: patience. During the early years, progress feels slow. Markets go up, markets go down. Sometimes your portfolio might even lose money for a while, and that can feel discouraging. Many new investors start questioning the process. They think they need a better strategy, a faster strategy, or a riskier strategy. So they chase hot stocks, they try day trading, they jump into speculative investments. But in reality, the problem usually isn't the strategy. The problem is time. Wealth is built quietly. One of the biggest misconceptions about wealth is that it happens quickly. But the truth is much simpler. Wealth is usually built quietly, slowly, over many years. Most millionaires didn't suddenly become wealthy from a single investment. Instead, they followed very basic habits. They saved consistently, they invested regularly, and they stayed invested for a long time. These habits might not sound exciting, but over decades, they can produce extraordinary results. The momentum effect. Once you reach your first $100,000, something powerful begins to happen: momentum. Imagine pushing a heavy car. At first, it barely moves. You push harder and harder, and slowly the car begins rolling. But once it gains momentum, keeping it moving becomes much easier. Wealth works the same way. The first $100,000 requires enormous effort because you're doing almost all the work yourself. But once your investments become large enough, the growth starts coming from your money, not just your income. And that changes everything. Time becomes your greatest advantage. Another reason the first $100,000 is so important is that it activates the true power of time. Compounding only works if your money stays invested for long periods, and the earlier you begin, the more powerful this effect becomes. For example, imagine two investors. One starts investing at age 25. The other waits until age 35. Both invest the same amount every month, but because the first investor started earlier, they give their money an extra 10 years to compound. Those extra years can easily translate into hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional wealth. That's the power of time in the market. So how do ordinary investors actually reach this milestone? The process is usually much simpler than people expect. First, they invest consistently. Instead of trying to time the market, they invest every month. Second, they keep costs low. Low-cost index funds allow investors to keep more of their investment returns. And third, they stay patient. They understand that the early years are slow, but they trust the process. Over time, those small investments begin to grow, and eventually the portfolio reaches the point where compounding starts doing the heavy lifting. Why simplicity wins? Many people believe they need complex strategies to build wealth, but history shows something surprising. Simple investing strategies often outperform complicated ones. A diversified portfolio of low-cost index funds has historically delivered strong long-term returns. And because these funds track the overall market, investors benefit from the growth of the largest companies in the world. Instead of trying to guess which company will win, they simply own the entire market. For most investors, that simple approach is more than enough. The psychological breakthrough. There's also something powerful that happens psychologically when someone reaches their first $100,000. It changes the way they see money. Suddenly, investing feels real. They begin to see that their investments can grow significantly over time, and that confidence often leads to even better financial habits. People become more focused on saving, more disciplined with spending, and more committed to long-term investing. In other words, the first $100,000 isn't just a financial milestone, it's a mindset shift. The real secret. At the end of the day, the secret to reaching $100,000 isn't complicated. It's a combination of three simple things: consistency, patience, and time. You don't need perfect stock picks. You don't need to predict the market, and you don't need a huge income. What matters most is starting early and continuing to invest regularly. Because once you cross that first $100,000 milestone, the journey towards long-term wealth becomes much easier. Final takeaway. The first $100,000 is hard. There's no way around it. It requires discipline, it requires patience, and it requires time. But once you reach that point, something incredible begins to happen. Your money starts working harder than you do. Compounding accelerates, and the path towards long-term wealth becomes much clearer. So if you're still building towards that first $100,000, remember this. Progress may feel slow right now, but every investment you make is helping push that financial snowball forward. And once it starts rolling, it can grow far larger than most people ever imagine.